How many times have you heard that the ticket to a better future is higher education? Well, according to studies, college and advanced degrees do translate into larger salaries regardless of race. But college does not pay off for Black students the way that it does for white students. From huge student loan debt to a racist job market, Black college students face disadvantages that have lifelong consequences. Today, we're asking why and how do we level the playing field? We are also doing a poll and asking you to weigh in on whether you think the government should eliminate all student loan debt. Post your response and comments and share the show because we want a diversity of opinions on this question. Next, our experts weigh in.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
The average student loan debt for Black students is $24,000, whereas for the average white student, the amount is somewhere around $16,000. Moreover, Black student loan debt rises over time, while white debt diminishes, and upon graduation, the loan gap triples. Now, experts say this gross disparity is caused by a number of factors, from the schools students attend, to parental wealth, to discrimination in the workforce. Experts also agree the gross disparity is the primary driver of the huge Black-white wealth gap. The median net worth of Black educated families is $72,000, while similar white households, and that's educated white households, have a net worth of over $400,000. With escalating interest rates, Black families will never catch up to whites, even when they have multiple college degrees, because, as the statistics show, they are saddled with outrageous loan debt. Next, you're going to meet a couple of students who know this reality all too well. Here for our leadoff panel are Jalen Sanders. He has a bachelor's, a master's, and a law degree from the University of Baltimore. Also is Shay Houchin. Shay is an art graduate from San Francisco State University. Good morning and welcome, Shay and Jalen.
How you doing today this morning?
Good morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for, being willing to talk so honestly and openly about this topic. This is a topic that's on the minds of so many people, not just students, but families and lawmakers and policymakers. We've been tweeting about it this morning and lots of folks are weighing in. I want to start with you, Jalen. 3 degrees. First of all, congratulations, a barrister. Always happy to see folks joining the legal profession, particularly people of color. But your education came with a pretty hefty price tag and pretty hefty student loan debt. Tell us how much debt you were in, as a result of getting these 3 incredible degrees.
So as of now, with 3 degrees, my bachelor's, my master's, and my doctorate, I'm at a whopping $238,000 in student loan debt.
Wow. And let's understand a little bit about the college you went to. Did you get these 3 degrees all at the same school?
No. So first I went to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County for my bachelor's in English Communications and Technologies. Then I went to the University of Maryland Global Campus for my, I like to call it an incidental master's, because prior to getting my master's, I went to a law school in Charlotte, North Carolina, known as the Charlotte School of Law. And that school got shut down because they were lying to the federal government and misappropriating funds. So who got stuck with the bill after the school shut down? All of the students. So in order to kind of bolster my application, because I always had dreams of being a lawyer, and, a very powerful role model in the community, I went to get a master's to kind of show other institutions who are afraid to touch us students that went there, that we were more than capable of handling a higher graduate course level, which then ultimately led me to my final home of the University of Baltimore School of Law.
So, Jalen, help us understand $238,000. Like, that number is mind-boggling. That's like 2 or 3 homes in some cities. It's a fleet of cars. You can think about what you can buy with $250,000. Where did most of that debt come from? Was it at that law school or the undergraduate program or your master's degree?
So one of the blessings I was able to experience is that my mom worked for the University of Maryland system for over 30 years, put in a long work so that like her kids could go to school for a proliferated price. The majority of that loan debt comes from the interest rates and the loans themselves from both law schools that I attended. The Charlotte School of Law was a private law school, and unfortunately, unbeknownst to me, I did not know of their illegal business practices. So $40,000 in private tuition, $20,000 federally to make sure I could like live and sustain myself in Charlotte, because when you're in law school, you have to be a full-time student. But over the years, the interest on those loans have essentially become loans themselves. And unless I make double payments a month, then it's not feasible for me to think like, oh, okay, I can pay this off in like 4 to 5 years or a normal time frame. So you get a lot more than what you bargained for when you take out those student loans.
Help us understand, Jalen. I'm going to have you jump in, Shay, in a minute. But Jalen, how long? If you just pay the regular monthly payments that are required by you, how long will it take you to pay off $238,000?
If I paid the monthly minimum, just the bare minimum monthly, which would be $500 based on income-based repayment for the federal government and $738 for Sallie Mae and Freddie Mac Bank for the private side, that's about $1,500, like around $1,500 a month, part of my math. But it would take me at least a good 10 years to pay that off. But then you have to add on the interest on top of that, meaning I would have to pay twice a month on both of those loans to prevent the interest from accruing and becoming another loan. So if I didn't pay the interest, you want to extend that to its mortgage level. Might be 15, 20 years into my life before I pay off all this money or even start to make a healthy dent in it.
So I know you're not, you weren't a math major, but do you know what the real dollars are? And by the time you pay back this $238,000, is it going to be somewhere like, twice as much, 600,000, $1 million?
Oh, so when I'm doing my research, because I've been looking into it, because they also, what people may not know is, because at the time, and this is what makes it predatory, they don't trust you as a student to pay back all of that money. They'll then put one of your parents or somebody close to you on the hook for that money. So if you don't pay it, they'll then go after your parents and say, well, we want it all from you. And then that inhibits everyone because you can't refinance homes. Right. You can't make certain financial endeavors you want to. But to get back to the question, I took out a $40,000 loan in 2015. I am sitting at $63,000 I owe for that one $40,000 loan. And it's only been about 4 or 5 years. So I took out
$23,000 of interest.
Of interest that is accrued on top of that loan.
Wow. Jump in here, Shay. I know your loan debt isn't as high as Jalen's, but it's also problematic. How much loan debt do you have from your undergraduate degree?
I am so sorry, Jalen. I hope that you are so happy in your profession that you are doing with that sacrifice that we have to do. I owe $32,000. I'm an artist. I only went to school for my BA, but if we factor in the fact that I'm an artist and $32,000 with an artist's payment, that's just impossible. It's actually impossible.
Right. How much are your payments, Shay, on a monthly basis? I know Jalen said he's paying about $1,500.
Right. So prior to COVID, they had my payments at about $330 a month. I was living in New York City at the time, which was difficult in itself. So I did about, 100 and something a month, and they just email me each time that they didn't get the full amount. So as of now, what they're requesting is 100 and something a month, which is still too much for me.
Right. And Jalen, we hear all these programs of, loan relief, particularly for these colleges that have gone out of business, these private for-profit colleges that, have histories of, preying on students, that the federal government has stepped in and tried to provide some loan relief. Did that happen with respect to that law school you went to that, shut down? Did you get any loan relief?
So here's the thing. I applied for the Borrower's Defense Repayment Program. So that's the plan that they're implementing now for all that student loan debt that you took out for those for that law school. The issue is the federal government moves very slow when it comes to that process. So the tricky part is, even if I put those loans in forbearance, which basically means I don't have to pay them back yet, if they deny my application, not only do they tell me, all right, you have to pay this loan back, they add the interest on top of that. And if you want to go after the school, because there was a class action lawsuit against the Charlotte School of Law, the whole business law schemata prevents you from kind of getting retribution, because you have the parent company, which was Infi Law, and Charlotte Law was subsidiary. But the courts couldn't prove that there was enough connection that they were funneling money to the parent company. So I was one of 1,600 students. That school made at least, I can guarantee you, $350 million plus off of the students that attended it from its opening till its close. Wow. They only offered a $2 million settlement. When you break that down amongst all those people, it's like a $500 check for me taking out $60,000 to go to this institution to try to better my life. Wow. It's a process. And then can't really get people on the phone nowadays either. So it's all automated, and maybe you just got to keep your grit about it and keep the fight going.
And Shay, I'll ask you, at the time you were taking out these loans, did you have any idea that, you'd be in this predicament as an artist, trying to pursue your career in art, and yet having this payment? Did you consider that?
Absolutely not. When you go, yeah, I understand. Absolutely. I did not expect to have such difficulty, because I went to school with the intent to learn the skills to be able to set myself up, which is something that parents want for all their children. I did not have the privilege to put a person on my loans. I grew up in Inglewood. My mother was mentally ill most of my life. She was a homeless person that you would see on the street. So I did have the privilege also of being able to have a lot of my education covered due to our government, which I'm super, super thankful for. But with the amount that we spend for our education, the time we put in, the sacrifices, did we factor in that it took me 7 years to get a degree because it was so difficult to work and to take care of myself and to be a Black woman in America and to get it done, then finally get it done. And you think like, wow, I've done so much work. You did it. And it's still just not a space, not a society that allows you to reap the rewards of all this work that you did put in. All you receive is a bill and saying, hopefully you'll work it out. So no, I didn't expect it at all. And like Jalen said, we do keep pushing forward, but it's not fun, and I don't think it's right.
Well, first of all, congratulations to you, because you
Thank you.
described. No, I mean your challenge is real, and that's the reality of so many students of color, is that they start this process with tremendous odds against them and tremendous barriers, but being the resilient, strong Black woman that you are, and I know that even though I've just met you 5 minutes ago, it's just coming across the screen. You got it done. So, just congratulations to you for sticking it out and being resilient and getting your degree. I want to bring into the conversation now Cody Hounanian. He is the program director of the Student Debt Crisis Center, and Dr. Marshall Anthony Jr. He's the associate director of policy and advocacy for higher education at Center for American Progress. Both are experts on the student loan crisis, and let's call it what it is. It's a downright crisis. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Anthony and Cody. So Cody, Jalen, $238,000, some bogus law school that, unfortunately 1,600 students found and made their way to, and then only to have the school shut down and as Jalen said, to be offered pennies despite the millions of dollars that this law school made. How common is Jalen's story?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me today. And I do have to say thank you to Jalen and Shay for sharing their stories. I know it's not easy, but at Student Debt Crisis, putting these stories front and center is, for us, the most effective way we can create change. Unfortunately, Jalen's story is far too common, but I think his story is helpful here because it lays out so many of the experiences that, in my opinion, make it clear why we need to cancel student loan debt. So, first off, this is someone who is one of the brightest and most ambitious among us, right? This is someone who wants to go to law school, is determined, and despite obstacles like a predatory school, doesn't want to give up. Yet they find on the back end, once they graduate, they finally achieve that dream, that they've got these student loans that have, predatory interest rates that, mind you, the government's collecting. It's not even going to a bank typically. Every year that are in that. And on top of that, this is someone who went to a predatory school in which there are current laws already designed to help him, but the programs are too hard to qualify for and nearly impossible to receive relief. So with that in mind, this system's broken, and that's exactly why we're calling for broad-based student debt cancellation that would help someone like Jalen, who has a bright future ahead of him, but a broken student loan system getting in the way.
And Dr. Marshall, jump in. We know that there's $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. What percentage of that debt is carried by graduate students and students who would, be classified as middle class or maybe even wealthy? Because when we talk about the elimination of student loan debt, we get into these debates about whose debt should be eliminated. Should we be eliminating the debt of a Jalen who, got a lot of debt, but Jalen's going to be a baller. He's going to make a lot of money. And, should we be eliminating Jalen's debt as this prominent lawyer that he's on his way to becoming? So help us understand what the percentage of folks are, what the percentages, how the percentages break down in terms of that 1.7 trillion.
Yeah, as Cody had mentioned, the system is broken and it's been broken. Even before the pandemic, student debt really got out of hand as a result of funding cuts brought on by the Great Recession over a decade ago when I first attended college. And we're still literally trying to make up for those cuts. Only 18 states have fully recovered to pre-recession levels. And Areva, this matters because we know that cuts to higher ed funding typically means increased tuition, loan borrowing, and loan default. And this debt can affect a borrower's ability to buy a house, save for retirement, and even support a family. And we know that it disproportionately impacts borrowers of color, specifically Black borrowers. As much as 1/3 of Black borrowers default on their student loans, with Black non-completers faring even worse. Sometimes people think if you don't finish a college, you're no longer responsible for that debt. That's not true. You still are responsible for that debt, and you don't have a college degree to help pay for some of it. But it's even still bad. The debt crisis is even still bad for college completers. Within 12 years of completing a bachelor's degree, more than 20% of Black borrowers still default on their student loans. Even for Black adults from high-income families, debt is still bad. Black student debt from the highest income family default at nearly 7 times the rate as their white peers. And as you had mentioned, as someone with advanced degrees, we often hear these problematic notions and saying, well, you chose to do that. You chose to get that degree. You should be responsible for that. Well, we know because of systemic racism in society and in the education system, Black people have to do more to somewhat catch up to our white peers. For example, Black grad students in research and scholarship-based doctoral programs, as I've recently just graduated, are half as likely as their white peers to receive fellowships or assistantship opportunities. And we know that because of the disparities in the funding opportunities that Black graduate students have, which this plays a huge role in us having to make the decision that in order to get these degrees, to grow our economic mobility, we have to take on more debt in order to get that. And it shouldn't be, these things should be considered when we're thinking about plans to help cancel the debt across the board. And I do want to mention that it's often this notion that, well, you all put yourselves in this position. Again, it's not, we didn't just put ourselves in this position. Society has put us in this position. Systemic racism has put us in this position. Therefore, it should be the responsibility of that to help cancel this debt.
But Cody, I do want to, dig a little deeper on who's in this $1.7 trillion. And I hear what Dr. Marshall is saying, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. This is a social justice, a racial justice issue. There are, systemic, structural, and racist issues that impact particularly borrowers of color. But I don't think we can have the conversation if we don't, honestly assess that if we eliminate all student loan debt, we are going to be eliminating some debt from some middle class and wealthy families. So what percentage of the $1.7 trillion of that debt is owned or held by middle class families, if you know that, if that's been determined?
Well, it's hard to say, and I say that because it depends on what you consider middle class. And I think this is really important, particularly in the discussion around racial equity. So traditionally, this discussion has been shaped around what people's individual incomes look like. And so the narrative has been, well, and as you mentioned, like, why should we cancel student loan debt for people that presumably are highly educated and will have high incomes? But when you think about the people that have been impacted by systemic racism and decades of obstacles, It's more about family wealth and individual wealth building. And there's a recent research from the Roosevelt Institute that's really painted a much more nuanced picture about this. And what the Roosevelt Institute is saying is, if you look at individual wealth instead of income, then debt cancellation is actually a very progressive policy. And in fact, they go as far as saying that more cancellation means more benefits for the people that need it most and have the least amount of assets and wealth. And so they tie this not only as a progressive policy, but critical to addressing racial equity because, as we mentioned already, Black and brown borrowers have these generational wealth obstacles that are very separate from what their income is. So I think that's really important to note. On the other side of that, obviously, one of the most common perceptions about student debt cancellation is that some people will receive it that others feel don't deserve it. And I have two quick answers to that. One, whenever we create policies at a governmental level that are designed to help Americans, we can't prevent the people who need it the most just because a small fraction of people who may not need it will receive that kind of relief. And at the end of the day, even those that receive debt cancellation that maybe aren't in dire situations will take that freedom, they'll reinvest in the economy, create small businesses, whatever it may be. It's an economic boom that helps all of us. And also, I just want to put borrower stories front and center one more time. We talk to borrowers every single day that tell us that, hey, I'm a doctor, I'm an attorney, I am what people strive to be, and yet I live in a dire situation because my student loan debt is crushing and there's no way out from under it.
I do want to ask Jalen and Shay, though, would you guys be in favor of debt elimination if it came with some strings attached? Strings attached like public service. Like if you get X, 1,000 of your debt eliminated, then you got to serve X number of months or years in some form of service to either nonprofit organizations or government organizations. Would that be, for you, Jalen, a way to do this in a way that, feels fair?
So in all honesty, that's my career goal. I want to be the first African-American attorney general for the state of Maryland. And listening to this conversation, listening to everything that's going on, like, I love public service, but I also see how students that go to school and accumulate all this debt, they can't even afford to go to public service because, as you know, there's a salary cap on how much the public can pay you based on the taxpayers. So I would be more than in favor of doing my tenure of 20 to 25 years working for the public service to give back. Like, I'm literally, my father is from North Carolina. My mother's from Baltimore, Maryland. I do not come from a wealthy background. Like, my parents are very blue collar, lower, like literally poor. They grew up without much. I'm the first person to ever take these kind of strides and like put myself out there to do something very scary. I didn't have any role models ahead of me to see this, but I knew I wanted to create generational wealth for my family. But better, more than that, I wanted to help the public through education, through exposure, through influence. I want to be able to do that without having to worry that, okay, I can't take this $70,000 job because I know Freddie Mae and Sally Mac and the federal government is going to be asking me for $1,500 to $2,000. And because I make a certain amount, I don't qualify for certain programs. So it's like you're always teetering that little middle line of, I'm a couple $100 away from not having anything, or the whole balance beam that I'm on is going to collapse. So I'm more in favor with forgiveness with strings attached, because I think the public needs that. I think it needs a rebrand. I think it needs more resources and more opportunities. I think it needs fresh young people in the market ready and willing to make some change.
Well, what about you, Shay? Would you be in favor of elimination if you had to give some kind of give back public service to nonprofit or government?
Okay, I would absolutely be a part and a team member on that team. But what I have to speak of is that Black and brown people, we have serviced America more than enough. So unless they are actual programs, unless they are actual, rather than relieving my debt and giving it to, rather than relieving my debt and just relieving it, invest that into serious strategy programs that you give to the people that are proposing the ideas to you. We want our community to be better. I would love to be able to open the coffee shop that also has the artist space in the back that every kid can go to that I was able to go to from when I was 5 to 18 years old, going to Amazing Grace Conservatory, going to all the Los Angeles places that were the nonprofit places that were in place. But these were people that had the funds to do it. Yes, we can start a nonprofit, but I can't start a nonprofit in my garage. And if I don't have that extra $300 and something a month to do so, then I absolutely can't do it. So would I do it? Yes, but it would have to be so not, for lack of better words, not poop. Give us something that we can actually work with. Give us something that actually means something, that I can actually see some changes. Otherwise, I have given more than enough service. I think 400 years of being held back is more than enough service.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point, and that point is often made by people of color that, 200 years, even if we eliminate all the student loan debt, we're so far behind, we're still not going to close the wealth gap without more, and then more often becomes, for many people, the reparation conversation. I do want to ask you, though, about the policy positions that are on the table now.
Yeah.
There's a $10,000 plan being proposed by the Biden administration, eliminating $10,000 in debt. But we know Elizabeth Warren, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, they're pressing for $50,000
right.
Debt elimination. I know, Dr. Marshall, you say $10,000 is the way to go.
Yeah, so at Center for American Progress, we say at least $10,000 is the way to go, which would eliminate the loan balances of 16 million borrowers, including those most likely to default. As right now, so we are also still in favor with anything that's above 10,000, but at least that 10,000 threshold will eliminate the most vulnerable populations who are being affected by the student loan debt crisis.
And what about you, Cody? Does your center take the position that 10,000 is not enough and that the Biden administration needs to be far more aggressive and adopt the Warren plan of 50,000?
We look at it like this. With new research showing that more cancellation means more benefits for people who need it most, and knowing that debt cancellation could unleash the potential of the economy right now when we need it most, with all that in mind, we're calling for the most amount of debt cancellation possible. And right now on the table, there is the $50,000 resolution in the Senate and the House calling on the president to cancel $50,000 per borrower. That would erase the debt for 85% of borrowers. We look at that as the gold standard that's on the table right now. But I also want to clarify one thing that's really important. The way that this conversation is shaped over the last year, it has become a fight over 10,000 or 50,000. And I always want to clarify that on the campaign trail, President Biden said that he wanted to cancel $10,000 in student loan debt immediately as COVID relief. And on top of that, he wanted to cancel a ton of tuition-related student debt for borrowers who went to public universities. So even the president has acknowledged that $10,000 is just a starting point and doesn't go far enough. And if I could just add one more point, I love that you asked our student borrowers here, if they would contribute to something like public service for loan forgiveness. And I just want to note that public service loan forgiveness is already a program that exists in law. And we see here, people are raising their hands. They want to participate in something like this. But this is another example of a program that's broken and has failed to give the relief to teachers and nurses and firefighters and other people who deserve it. So we can't keep promising borrowers a way out from under their debt and then keeping them stuck in a broken system. Because of that, erasing student debt for millions of people, it's the best way to wipe the slate clean and really give us a reset on how we think about financing higher education in the future.
But Cody, even if the $50,000 bill being proposed by Warren and Pressley is passed, what does that do for Jalen? I mean, Jalen's at 238. So does that mean,
Absolutely.
What happens to
it's a great point. It's a great point. So 85% of people, they will no longer have student loan debt. They will move on. There will be Jalens of the world that still have student loan debt. And that's why we feel that we can't just focus on debt cancellation. We also want to fix the current existing programs. So if Jalen had $50,000 in student loan debt erased and then knew that he actually could get public service loan forgiveness after 10 years of following his dream to be the attorney general, he would have a light at the end of the tunnel. So we need to fix the currently existing programs as well, make sure they work for people who need them, and also take a huge portion of this $1 trillion student debt portfolio off the table so we can really focus on managing a manageably decent sized portfolio of student loans.
We're running out of time, but Jay, I'll give you the last word on this. What do you want lawmakers to know? What is it that they're missing, you think, from the conversation? Because, it's stories like yours, as Cody said, that's going to move the needle, that gets, pulls on the heartstrings and makes this more than just, a statistic on a piece of paper. So what do you want people to know about this situation?
What I really want people to know, and I want them to embed it in their hearts, because like you said, it's two sides to the spectrum. You have people that have none. You have people that have a lot. You have some that think, oh, well, you took this money out, so you should deal with it. You have others that think like this was extremely predatory. I want policymakers and business people to know that your business decisions and the lining of your pockets is crippling so many generations to come. It's crippling us. It's literally a business, and I lose money by doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And you have a clear example of that with Sallie Mae. They made $5 billion off of student loan debt, went to an island, threw a party, and then sold all that debt back in 2014 to the federal government. It's sick. It's sick. And it shouldn't be that way. Because why, if I want to leave a legacy, I want to further my education, I want to enhance myself, and I want to provide examples to youth in Baltimore City. They're like, yo, you can come from nothing. You can come from the best parts. You can come from the worst parts. You can still do it. You can be better than me. If I want to do that, but I have a paywall in front of me saying, well, we're not going to qualify you for a house, but you can pay $1,500 in rent. Oh, wait, you make this much, you don't qualify for these programs. And then they're still going to blow up your phone, send you mad emails, everything, asking for that money back after you literally crippled so many people to come. I just want you to know that you need to do the right thing, man. You need to do the right thing. Is it the most cost effective? Is it the most financially beneficial thing? No, absolutely not. But do the right thing, because you don't know how many people you're hurting. You don't know how much of somebody's last you took away. You don't know how much pain you're inflicting and further dividing America based on millions of dollars that you don't even blink at a year. I want you to think about that, how many lives you're affecting with the decisions that you make.
Yeah, we've got to leave it there. I love what you just said so eloquently, Jalen. Do the right thing. And let's hope our policymakers are listening. Thanks to all of you for joining me for this leadoff panel this morning. Really interesting conversation. Thanks, Dr. Marshall, Anthony, and Cody Hounanian for the work that both of you are doing. And Jalen, Attorney General Jalen for the state of Maryland. That doesn't seem far off. All of us who've been sitting here listening to you know that, you're the kind of guy that whatever you set your mind to, you can achieve. So we're already singing your praises and celebrating your victory. And thank you so much, Shay. Looking for that coffee shop with the art studio in the back for kids right here in Los Angeles. I appreciate the work that you're doing as well. Best of luck to both of you. All right. Really interesting conversation. My next guest is an authority on all of this student loan debt, in particular our tax code. Her name is Professor Dorothy Brown. She's a law professor at Emory University Law School. She's a tax, race, and policy expert, and she's the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Whiteness of Wealth: How the Tax System Impoverished Black Americans and How We Can Fix It. Good morning and welcome, Professor Brown.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I know you've heard the stories of Jalen and Shay. I know in your book you actually interviewed families, generations of families who are in very similar situations, but it's heartbreaking to hear those stories and to see someone as ambitious and as driven and as hardworking as Jalen, to say he has $238,000. And let's talk about our tax code, because we talk about debt elimination, but are they talking about fixing the tax code? Because debt forgiveness is income.
That's absolutely right. And you can't have one conversation without the other if you actually want to help these graduates with their debt. Absolutely. And what the tax code does, we have been talking about debt because that's how most Black Americans finance college. But the other way to finance college is your parents to pay for it. And if you are white, you're more likely to have that happen. And guess what? Our tax laws say that's tax-free income. So part of this problem with our tax system is it rewards the white way of doing college, but disadvantages the Black way of doing college.
Yeah, one of the things I was really struck by, Professor, is the generational debt. So, and we heard Jalen say that his lenders have actually now, put his parents onto his loan. So if he defaults, they can then go after his middle class, lower working income parents who he just said, barely have any money. How often is that the student is taking out the debt, but the parents themselves either have their own student debt or they have to become signers on the debt that their kids are taking out?
It's far more often in the Black community than the white community. And when we talk about debt forgiveness, the one thing I think about is, what about parental debt? What about the debt of parents who have taken out student loans on behalf of their students? And in Atlanta, we had this wonderful gift by Robert Smith and Morehouse, where he basically paid off all the debt of the graduating class of 2019. And ultimately, what he decided to do was also pay off parental debt, because in the Black community, that is a significant part of the college debt issue.
Yeah, and one of the things Dr. Marshall Anthony said was that he wanted to remind people that even if you don't graduate, you still owe the debt. And I saw a statistic that says 60% of Blacks who enroll in college never graduated. Is that number real? That just
Yes.
broke my
Yes.
heart as a Black woman.
It was the most depressing. Okay, in my book that has lots of depressing statistics, that was the one that took me over the edge. That was the one that made me shut the laptop, leave my house, and say, you know what? If I don't go back home, I don't have to read anymore, and I don't have to finish this book. So I talked myself into going back home and finishing the book, but it was the most depressing statistic. 60% of those who enroll, Black students who enroll in college, do not graduate, but they leave with debt.
And help us understand, Professor, are they not graduating because the debt becomes so great? Like you've maxed out your loan, so now you can't get a loan to finish that third or fourth year. What are the reasons that they're not graduating?
So it's a lot of different reasons. One reason is the financial aid that they get from the college or don't get from the college is insufficient, so they have to work. Working, juggling a full-time course load is virtually impossible. Having toxic environments that run you out of the institution because you don't feel welcome, supported, and nurtured. So there are a myriad of reasons, but finances is a key reason. They have to take out more debt. They can't get qualified for more debt. Their parents aren't in a position to help them by co-signing a loan. So fixing the financial end of things will significantly increase the graduation rate, as well as thinking about where to go to college. So a disproportionate percentage of Black Americans go to for-profit colleges that have ridiculously high tuition, but embarrassingly low graduation rates. The schools with the highest graduation rates are selective institutions, right? The highest ranking schools, but they have very low percentages of Black students, even though they purport to be committed to diversity.
Yeah, and let's talk about the distinction in these loans, because there's a lot of focus on the Biden administration eliminating loan debt. Will that loan debt be from some of these private lenders, or is that just a federal loan debt?
That's a good question. I think, well, let me not speak. Maybe Andre knows, but I think what the Biden administration is talking about is a broad spectrum of debt forgiveness. But 10,000 isn't enough. 50,000 to me is a start. And talking about debt forgiveness is talking about it at the back end. The front end for me is increasing Pell Grants that has not kept up with the rate of inflation. That would enable Black students to go to college and graduate with very little debt. So debt relief is what we do because we didn't fix the problem to begin with. Increasing Pell Grants is what we do to prevent the problem at the back end.
Yeah, you mentioned Andre. Let's bring in Dr. Andre Perry to the conversation. He's a senior fellow with the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program and scholar in residence at American University. He's also the author of Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Perry. Do you know the answer to that question, Dr. Perry? Because we've been having this conversation about, is it 10,000 or 50,000? And I'm not sure if the policy is directed just at those federally backed grants, or some of those private loans, and not grants, but the loans from federal institutions versus private institutions.
Yeah, currently as it stands, it would cancel the debt of federally backed student loans. So right now we don't have the policy in place to cancel the debt or held by private banks, which is significant when you talk about Black borrowers. But right now it's the legislation that's being proposed, as well as the various plans, are focused on federally backed loans.
And help us, Professor Brown, understand this. So you heard Jalen say he took out a loan that was $40,000 in principal, but now it's $63,000, $23,000 interest. And as I was reading, parts of your book and reading other stories, there are people who are literally, they pay $500 a month, but they accrue $1,500 a month in interest. So it's this endless cycle. What are the interest rates on these loans? Are we talking like usury rates, above 10%?
It's not necessarily usury rates, but when you owe $1,500,
that's a legal word for outrageous rates. So,
right? But when you owe $1,500, but you're only paying $300 or $400, that difference gets added to the loan balance, and it just keeps going up and up and up. It's called income-based repayment, right? It was designed with this great idea in mind. If you take a low-paying job, a public service job, for example, and you have so much income, well, you can't pay the full amount, so we'll help you out. We will subsidize you in effect by putting the amount you cannot pay on the back end of the loan, but it just grows and grows and grows. That's why you see Black borrowers 5 years out having significantly higher debt balances, whereas white debt borrowers, their balances go down because that's how you amortize debt. But if you're on income-based repayment, it just keeps going up and up and up.
Yeah, it's not just for you to pay off the principal. Go ahead, Dr.
Yeah, and what a lot of these programs and initiatives don't really recognize is that there is income discrimination. There's discrimination in the job market. And so many Black people with similar education just don't receive the same pay. So there is a mistake that's constantly made on this issue, that people with the same levels of income have the same ability to pay. And that is not accurate. We talked earlier about the wealth disparities in this country. The reason why there is now a focus on wealth as opposed to just income, because it really highlights the capacity issues of people's ability to pay. We don't have a way to means test wealth at this point, but there is a focus on wealth, because the more debt you cancel, the more you close the large Black-white wealth divide. And the more you do that, the more you improve debt income ratios, you increase the ability for people to purchase homes, to get cars, to do all that we ask of them. And just one other point, I just want to make this point. We ask, particularly Black Americans, to go to school, do what they're told, and then you will achieve the American dream. But part of that American dream should be about reducing wealth disparities.
Right.
I mean, this is a very crass statement. We don't go to school to stay poor, asset poor. But that's what exactly is happening, that people are going to school, they're taking on large amounts of debt because they're striving. One of the data points that Black people are taking out more loans is really a reflection of our willingness to go to school, to live
graduate school.
Graduate school. And
yes.
So, and this is something near and dear to my heart, and a lot of Black people in general who are experts in this area. We are also dealing with this very issue, because many of us who come from poor backgrounds, we go to school and guess what? We're told, then go to graduate school. get the PhD, and you just are taking on more and more debt. And so you have, and I'm glad one of the previous speakers talked about this. Again, why we talk about wealth and not income. Black people were denied wealth. Right. And so some of the reasons why white people pay off their loans faster is because they can get that assistance from their parents. They had an additional home they could sell to pay off those student loans. They had the assets that we were prohibited from getting. And so for me, I say cancel debt, but that's only one aspect of this problem. We ultimately need to figure out also how to have some type of free college option, because debt cancellation is just one moment in time, one part of that solution. We need something more moving forward.
I'm glad you brought up, Dr. Perry, the whole graduate school piece, because that becomes one of the talking points, Professor Brown, about privileged, educationally privileged people of color wanting the government to pay off of their debt. And, I read some Republican talking point that said, if you can't afford $200 or $300 a month in a payment, shame on you. What good did the degree do you? But help us understand, that are there in your research abusers, people who are taking out loans, whose families otherwise, could pay for their college or their graduate programs, but are choosing not to for their own, personal reasons, or people who are taking out the loans and not using it towards education? Is that as rampant as, some would have us to believe?
No, it's not as rampant. Of course it exists, but there's no system that is perfect, right? I think one of the earlier guests said, just because somebody might benefit, think about Social Security, right? The richest Americans get Social Security, but nobody says, oh, we need to stop paying Social Security because the richest Americans get it. No, they don't say that. They're only saying it about debt because they think Black people are going to benefit, right? So when we think about how debt is paid for, and I think about graduate school, and the research that shows if you go to Harvard and you're Black and you apply for a job, you have to send out more interviews than if you're white. There is no educational attainment that Black Americans get where they stop being Black. There's a racist labor market. So it isn't the same thing. Oh, they have a graduate degree, therefore they're going to be treated like the white people with the graduate degree. Research says, no, they're not. They're going to be treated worse. And that same study had the jobs that the Black Americans applied for was the same as the jobs the white Americans applied for, but the companies came back with offers to interview for lower paying jobs. Mm-hmm. So this gets back to Andre's ability to pay, which really is the touchstone of tax law. But I digress. You don't have the same ability to pay. That's right. If we're getting disadvantaged with lower paying jobs when we went to school to get this education, to try to get out from under the racist labor market, we're still Black at the end of the day.
Yeah, so we have the same degree, but we definitely don't have the same pay. And we know for Black women that pay disparity is even greater than it is for Black men. Dr. Perry, HBCUs, again, I was stunned by, the crushing loan debt at historically Black colleges and universities. And I know you've done some work around how Black colleges have been historically underfunded. And in fact, I read something where you said that, actually money has been stolen from Black colleges, from states. But why the crushing loan debt in particular at Black colleges?
Well, HBCUs have a much higher percentage of people who qualify for student loans in the first place. Remember, and this goes to this issue of regressivity, that's essentially conveys that student loan debt is claimed that it only benefits the wealthiest Americans. The reality is that the student loan program is designed to help people with zero to negative loan debt. And so HBCUs have a much higher percentage of people who qualify because in general, Black people represent a much larger proportion of those who have zero to negative net worth in the first place. And so HBCUs are taking on students and they don't have a Robert F. Smith to cancel their debt, and while I think that's an amazing story, it's not policy. And it helped, what was it, 300 something students, 400 students. There are millions of students out there who need the same relief. We can actually use the Morehouse College Robert F. Smith example to essentially as a case study of sorts to see what happens to them moving forward. But right off the top, they can invest. They can have a better ability to buy a home. They could have better ability to purchase a car, to actually utilize their education. And so for HBCUs in particular and other institutions that carry high percentage of low wealth folks, debt cancellation is vital for those students.
And Professor Brown, I know we've been talking a lot about the problem in our last couple of minutes. Let's talk about some of the solutions. We've heard the proposals that are out there: the Biden proposal of $10,000, the Warren Presley proposal of $50,000 in debt elimination. What are some of the other ways that we can address this crushing student loan debt? And then in the bigger picture, this just enormous gap between the Black and white wealth. When you hear those numbers of educated, I think I opened the show with some statistic, white educated families, $400,000 in net worth. This Black educated family, somewhere around $72,000. I mean, the gap is just enormous and not closing, getting wider. What are some of those solutions we should be looking to?
So I naturally go to tax policy, and I believe there should be a tax on the wealthiest not-for-profit institutions to fully fund Pell Grants, for example. Because again, I go back to, we have this debt problem because we have a Pell Grant problem. We have a problem where this federal program, which originally paid 80% of college tuition, is now paying 30%. So people who are poor, and Pell Grants are for low-income Americans, have to make up the difference somewhere, and they do it with debt. So we have these rich institutions that are hoarding their resources. And one of the things we saw through COVID-19 is all of these rich not-for-profit institutions laid off people. They did all kinds of things to cut their budget as opposed to looking at their endowment. And their endowment is essentially tax-free. There's a small excise tax, but it essentially increases itself tax-free. Well, we, the federal government, which should be taxing that and using it. It's a systemic response. It's not the individual response that Andre was talking about with Robert Smith. It's a systemic policy response. So we need to use tax policy to benefit more low-income Americans.
Well, and thank you for keep beating the Pell Grant drum, because as a recipient myself of Pell Grants for my undergraduate education, I was able to hobble together the resources so that I came out of college before going to law school with very minimum student loan debt. And so many of my friends and colleagues were able to do so as a result of Pell Grants as well. So Dr. Perry, why aren't we talking more about Professor Brown's solution, and not just eliminating debt, but making more federal money available to students that, was available to us that went to school, in the 80s, who were able to do so and didn't have that kind of crushing loan debt?
Well, and Dr. Brown can speak to this more than I can, but wealthy people use their wealth to influence tax policy. I mean, put it this way: at the K-12 arena, in the K-12 education arena, theoretically, everyone gets a grant to go to a public school in their neighborhood.
Right.
No one is asked to pay back that grant to do what America wants us to do, to go to school. The reality is higher education is as basic as a K-12 education now. And we should have a public option, just like we do in the K-12 arena. But that would require that would require revenues that have to come. I mean, they're not going to come from a lower class or middle class Americans anymore. We're tapping them out. It would have to come from the richest Americans. And so this student debt cancellation issue is really a downstream problem. We eventually have to address the the wild spending essentially at the higher education level. And the way you do that, in my opinion, is to make college free for public institutions, because at least for public institutions, you have state legislatures essentially keeping student tuition down, where you don't see that in private institutions. And so for me, Dr. Brown is right. At some point, you have got to address tax code as a way to finance a higher ed system that also needs to be reformed. We need a public option.
And just finally for you, Professor Brown, I know your book got the attention of the Biden administration, and they actually reached out to you. Where did that go, if anywhere?
Nowhere. And I'm not remotely pleased with it. So, one of the things I push for in the book is race and tax statistics. And they're doing, from what I can tell, nothing other than talking, right? So the president has this racial equity order that says federal government agencies should disaggregate data by race so that we can see that Black Americans are in fact paying higher taxes than their white peers. And the Treasury Department, the White House doesn't seem all that interested in moving it forward. So I'm keeping an eye on it, and I'm tired of talk. I want to see action. So I keep pushing. And love coming on shows like this to talk about it. So thank you, Areva.
Yeah, sometimes it's this kind of persistent drum beating that will not only get their attention, but get them to move into action. What would that do, just briefly? If we got that data that you're pushing from the IRS, that data about how much ethnic groups are paying in taxes, what could we do with that information?
Well, what we would see is Black Americans are paying higher taxes than their white peers, and most people would say that's the wrong answer. And what we would do then, we would start to equate tax reform with racial equity. That's really the big picture goal. We should never have a conversation about tax reform without talking about the racial impact and what it would do to racial equity. And right now, it's a very non-racial equity conversation, and it's very disheartening. But I keep pushing.
Yeah, thanks you for that. And Dr. Perry, a final, thought from you. Are you, I know you're in favor of debt elimination for student loans, but is the 10,000 or the 50,000? Which are you voting?
Oh, beyond 50,000 and beyond. At some point, we need a reparative culture in this country that deals with the historic discrimination and racism leveled against Black people. And, we don't talk about reparations, but a lot, but we need to. And it's a minor issue, but we should be canceling student debt simply because Black people have been discriminated against in the higher education realm. The first affirmative action policy was really higher ed policy, essentially saying that white men had a chance at an education more than anyone else. And that had demonstrable harms moving forward. So we do need to cancel debt. And we also should find some way to close this racial wealth divide using reparations.
All right, we've got to leave it there. The reparations conversation is one I love to have. It gets people, really fired up. But I'm so excited because it seems like it's moving more into, these mainstream. It used to be a fringe conversation. If you even mentioned it, you were considered, to be kind of crazy or wacky or, fringe yourself. And now we are seeing real, policymakers and scholars being, free to talk about it in an open way. So, at least I think, are moving closer to not just talking, as Professor Brown said, but maybe taking action on it. Thank you so much for your work. Again, Dr. Perry's book is Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. And Professor Dorothy Brown's book is The Whiteness of Wealth, How the Tax System Impoverished Black Americans and How We Can Fix It. Both of you doing tremendous work, and I can't thank you enough for sitting down with me this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have been talking about, a really complicated subject. These are not easy topics to discuss, and particularly when you start talking about reparations and you talk about eliminating student loan debt, there's so much pushback that happens on the right. Again, as you heard our experts and our guests this morning say, people are so afraid that Black people might get a couple of crumbs that they'd rather kill the whole program than to do something that's going to benefit not just Black students, but will benefit students of all color. And when you hear stories like those from Jalen and Shay about how crippling this student loan debt is, how it prevents them from moving forward in their careers, we as a country are preventing our best and our brightest from coming forward and giving us the benefits of their talent, their skills, their expertise, and their drive to make this country better. I'm happy, I'm moved that we are now having these discussions. And that we have a president that has at least made elimination of student loan debt a priority. I agree with the experts this morning, $10,000 is not nearly enough. I mean, that's going to be a drop in the bucket for a student like Jalen. $50,000, I think, is just the opening part of this conversation, and we need to look at even doing more. Particularly for those students like Jalen that were subjected to that predatory school that he attended in North Carolina, and there's so many other schools out there like that. And what I say to Black kids who are thinking of taking out these loans, please, please, please talk to a financial expert, understand what you are getting into, understand the ramifications, make sure that you have not exhausted all other avenues for paying for your education. There are scholarship programs out there. There is the Pell Grant, even though it's less than it was in the 80s, it's still available. Just make sure you are getting good advice about how to finance your education so that you're not one of those students that ends up with that crushing loan debt. And then as it relates to students who are that 60% of Black kids who are enrolling in college and not graduating, we've got to do better. Those of us who have, the privilege of having graduated from, one school or maybe even multiple schools, we have a role to play in terms of mentoring young students who are coming through the educational process and reaching out, sending the ladder back down, lifting as we rise. And those of us who have college degrees that are not doing that, shame on you. You need to be doing that. You need to be lifting as you rise. Just some words to live by before I get out. The iconic historian, civil rights activist, author, and graduate of Fisk University and Harvard University, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, famously said, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line." Ooh, based on the conversations we had this morning, I'd say the problem of the 21st century and possibly even the 22nd century, if we don't get it together, is going to be the color line. I'm safe. You guys, I'm out. Be safe out there. Don't forget to wear your mask. And remember, we are all in this together.